They threw away my things while I was traveling, so I came back quietly and erased their entire scheme. I was standing on the staircase, hand on the railing, when I heard the first blow land not on a person, but on a cardboard box full of ornaments. Nathan slammed it onto the living room floor, so hard a few glass baubles inside broke with soft, pathetic pops. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the house, and Christmas music played as if someone had invited cheer in, but the atmosphere around my son and his wife felt colder than the snow outside our windows. Lydia adjusted the pillows on the sofa and glanced up at me with a smirk that cut deeper than any knife. "Heidi, stop drifting around upstairs. Guests don't pay to see some old woman haunting the hallway." Nathan gave a short, humorless laugh before adding, "You're just an expense with a pulse, Mom. We need the room for people who actually bring money in." He did not look at me the way a son looks at his mother. He looked at me the way an irritated landlord looks at a tenant who is behind on rent. Lydia picked up the old quilt I had kept for decades and tossed it down the stairs like it offended her hands. "The basement is more than enough for you. You don't need a view. You had your whole life to enjoy it." I felt the words land in the softest place inside me, the one that still remembered painting these walls with my husband, still remembered the year we skipped buying gifts so we could afford this house. And now I was being pushed out of the very rooms my memories had built. I turned away before they could see my expression. My silence only made Lydia chuckle under her breath. It struck me then, if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let stories like this travel far, so no grandmother ever has to be erased in her own home. Your support keeps voices like mine alive. Thank you, my dears. Keep listening. But the truth is, the cruelty in this house did not grow overnight. Nathan had been nurturing it for years, watering it with old narratives that never belonged to me. When he was 7, his father's gambling spiraled into something dangerous. Men we did not know drove past our house at night. Threats were left on our doorstep. I was terrified he would get our son hurt, so while I worked with a lawyer and tried to negotiate the debts, I placed Nathan temporarily into foster care. 3 months, 3 agonizing months of me cleaning motel bathrooms by day and crying into my coat sleeves by night, trying to get our lives back. Nathan never remembered that part of the story. He only remembered the strange house, the strange bed, the strange adults who were kind but not me. When he grew older, he told people, "She dumped me in foster care like I was a stray dog." I let him keep the story because arguing with a wounded memory is like shouting into the wind. But that was only the first knife he kept sharpened for me. When Nathan was 12, the last fight between his father and me exploded in the kitchen. His father had been drinking, again, and swung his arm dangerously close to Nathan. I stepped between them and said, "If you stay in this house, our son will never be safe." I did not mean it as an exile, I meant it as a plea. But Nathan only heard his father storm out and never return. Years later, he told Lydia, "She took my father away because he did not make enough money for her." It stunned me the first time I heard it. I remembered risking bones and marriage to keep my son safe. He remembered a mother who ruined his family. And still, the most hurtful seed had not been planted yet. That came years later, when Nathan and Lydia struggled for a child and demanded $20,000 for IVF. I had managed to save just enough to cover an upcoming heart procedure and a small emergency cushion. When I told them I could not give them the money, Nathan's face froze into something hateful. I said, "I love you, but this money keeps me alive." Lydia never forgave me. She told whoever would listen. She chose herself over giving us a child. Some grandmother. In front of the family, she looked at me, chin lifted, eyes sharp, and said, "You refused to help me become a mother, and now you want to stay here like you belong? You don't belong in our future." So, on that December morning, when they shoved me toward the basement and told me I had no place upstairs anymore, I realized something painful but necessary. They had been rewriting the story of who I was for years. Now, they were simply saying it out loud. The cruelest part was not the basement or the quilt or the coldness in their voices. It was how natural it felt for them, as if pushing me down one more level was just the next step in a plan they had been building long before I could see it. And it was only the beginning. When I returned from visiting my sister only a week away, 7 days spent helping her through a bout of pneumonia, I expected to walk back into my room, drop my suitcase on the rug my husband and I bought in our first year, and breathe in the familiar scent of cedar and lavender. Instead, the second I opened my bedroom door, my breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. The room was hollow. Not tidy. Not organized. Hollow. My closet hung open and empty. The hangers lined up like thin bones. The framed photographs that once sat on my dresser, my wedding picture, Nathan's kindergarten portrait, the last family photo before my husband passed, were gone. My jewelry box was missing. My quilt was nowhere. Only a few pieces of furniture remained, rearranged and stripped of anything that made them mine. It felt like walking into a stranger's room staged for a catalog, not a life. Nathan stood behind me, arms crossed casually as if he were proud of a chore completed. "We decluttered while you were away," he said. "Minimalism, Mom. Your stuff was taking up valuable space." Lydia did not bother hiding her satisfaction. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, her eyes moving across the barren room with the satisfaction of someone inspecting a conquered territory. "You should be grateful," she said sweetly. "You don't need so many reminders of a life that's already over." I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a misunderstanding. No one did. I whispered, "Where are my things?" Lydia shrugged, donated, tossed, recycled, whatever was easiest. "You were gone a whole week, Heidi. We figured you moved on from all this." Moved on. As if my life were a seasonal decoration they could pack away. I stepped deeper into the room, gripping the edge of my dresser to steady myself. The wood was bare where my jewelry box used to rest, a pale square of untouched finish surrounded by years of life. Nathan tapped my suitcase with his foot. "You should head downstairs," he said. "Your new room is ready." My new room. I followed them down the stairs with the slow dread of someone descending into an ending. The basement door creaked open, and a damp chill curled up my legs. Lydia gestured grandly, as though presenting a luxury suite. "You sleep here now. Fewer stairs for your old knees. See? We're thoughtful." Thoughtful. I stood in the middle of the cold concrete floor and felt myself shrink from a homeowner to a tolerated inconvenience. The woman who once signed the mortgage now had a designated corner underground. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Did you have to empty my room?" Nathan shrugged, already bored with my questions. "We have plans. You'll understand eventually." His tone said he did not care whether I understood at all. As they turned to leave, I noticed someone else standing at the top of the stairs, a boy, maybe 9 or 10, thin, with wide eyes that watched everything and trusted nothing. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. Lydia brightened instantly, adopting the tone she used whenever she wanted strangers to believe she was kind. "Heidi, meet Sam. We opened our home to a foster child. Unlike some people, we actually care about kids." Her glance toward me was sharp and cold, a reminder of every accusation she had hurled at me about refusing to pay for IVF. I lowered myself onto the edge of the folding bed and looked at the boy. Sam lingered in the doorway, as if unsure whether he was allowed inside. Lydia placed a firm hand on his back and guided him toward the kitchen, saying, "Come on, sweetheart, dinner time, and sit up straight when we eat. Guests from the agency might stop by." There was a rehearsed smoothness to her voice, the kind people use when they are being watched. When I came upstairs later for water, I found Sam sitting at the corner of the dining table, alone, eating quietly while Lydia and Nathan talked loudly, too loudly, about what great caregivers they were. Sam flinched every time Nathan raised his voice, even when he was only calling for more napkins. He kept looking around the house with the hesitant scanning of someone who has lived in too many unfamiliar places. Mason had been spending most afternoons at his cousin's house that week, which is why I had barely seen him around. Lydia leaned close to Nathan, whispering not softly enough, "This makes us look responsible." CPS, love seeing stability. I felt something in my stomach twist. They had brought a foster child into this house the exact week they erased my room, the exact week they forced me into the basement, the exact week they began preparing for guests. It was too convenient, too strategic, too wrong. And as Sam lifted his small eyes and met mine across the room, I realized I had lost my place in this house long before they carried my belongings out the door. I was not the only one being used for a purpose I did not understand yet. And whatever Nathan and Lydia were planning, they were not done. Dinner should have been simple: warm food, quiet conversation, peace in a house preparing for a CPS visit the next morning. Instead, I sat across from my own son while he practiced his cruelty like it was a family tradition. Lydia placed a plate in front of me with the same distant politeness she might use for a stranger she disliked. "If the caseworker asks you anything tomorrow," she said sharply, "don't talk, just nod, maybe smile. We don't need your rambling stories ruining our file." She didn't blink, didn't soften. She wanted the words to be cut. Nathan didn't even look up from his fork as he added, "You already messed up my life once when you dumped me in foster care. Don't ruin this one too." The CPS worker eventually stood to leave, promising to check in after the holidays. The front door shut. Silence filled the room for one breath, then Lydia exploded. "We wouldn't need foster money if you had just paid for IVF," she shouted, slamming her hand onto the counter. "We could have had our own child instead of begging the state to send us someone else." The words were poisoned, but they had been waiting in her throat for months. I felt them hit me like a physical blow. "I wasn't choosing between helping you and rejecting you," I said quietly. "I was choosing between dying on an operating table or living long enough to see my son's life continue. I chose to stay alive. I chose life." Nathan scoffed. "You chose yourself. You always do. You chose your heart over our future. So don't act surprised we're done choosing you." The air thinned. Something in me cracked, not loudly, but with a deep ache. I retreated to the basement after dinner, trying to steady my breath. Sam followed me not long after, with the silent steps of a child used to being unseen. He held out the house tablet shyly. "Can you open my game?" "It froze," he said. I took the tablet gently, pressing the power button. But when the screen lit up, a video thumbnail caught my eye. "Practice for CPS visit. Take 3. I shouldn't have clicked it, but I did. The video played instantly. Lydia stood in the living room, coaching Sam. "When she asks if you feel safe here, you say yes. Say we help you with homework every night." Nathan paced behind her, rehearsing lines like an actor. "Tell them my mother is slipping. Say she forgets things. Say she gets confused sometimes." Lydia laughed lightly. "Once the board believes she's too unstable to live here, we get the basement cleared for good. And once she's out, we can take another kid. The bigger grant kicks in with 2. My hands shook. They weren't just using Sam. They weren't just erasing my space. They were preparing to erase me. Not physically. Not yet. But socially. Administratively. Legally. They wanted CPS to think I was incompetent. They wanted foster care income. They wanted grants. And they wanted me out of the picture entirely. I stared at the tablet, the cold basement swallowing the last of my denial. Nathan and Lydia didn't hate me for the past. They hated me because I was in the way of their future. And for the first time since they shoved me downstairs, something fierce rose in my chest, not fear. Not sadness. Resolve. Because what I discovered on that tablet was not the end of their scheme. It was the beginning of mine. I first noticed Rowan because he watched people, not furniture. Most Airbnb guests commented on the Christmas lights or the smell of cinnamon Lydia sprayed before every check-in, but Rowan looked past all that. He watched the way I wiped the counter while Lydia talked loudly about our beautiful family. He watched how Nathan kept correcting Sam's posture at the dinner table, like the boy's spine determined their CPS rating. He watched me carry laundry downstairs alone, one step at a time, as if gravity had singled me out. He did not say anything at first, but his eyes followed me with the wary caution of someone seeing a puzzle where others saw a holiday postcard. One morning, he caught me in the hallway. "Mrs. Larson," he said gently. Do you live here? His tone was polite, but his eyes were searching. Downstairs, I answered, keeping my voice steady. He looked troubled, glancing toward the closed door of the foster room where Sam slept. The listing did not mention family members, he murmured. At least, not adult ones. He hesitated. I teach medical ethics at the university. It is a habit of mine to notice when something feels incomplete. I offered a tired smile. Incomplete is one word for it. Later that afternoon, I overheard Lydia on the phone in the kitchen. She spoke in her sugar-coated professional voice, the one she used for CPS and grant officers. Yes, the grant for renovating inherited property for foster placement came through, she said brightly. Once the final inspection is done, we are set for the year. I froze. Inherited property. My heart thudded heavily, slow and confused. How could anything in this house be inherited when I was standing right there, wiping a glass clean? Rowan must have overheard it too, because that evening he sat on the porch with his laptop, brows drawn tight. He glanced at me through the window a few times, as if deciding whether to involve me or spare me. Finally, he approached while I was folding laundry in the basement staircase. Heidi, he said quietly, I want to verify something. Not for curiosity, for your safety. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. He opened his laptop and angled the screen toward me. The first document on the county public record page made my knees buckle. Property tax adjustment. Inherited home exemption. Deceased owner, Heidi Larson. Successor, Nathan Larson. I stared at my own name spelled perfectly under the word deceased. The basement felt suddenly colder. The air thin. This must be wrong, I whispered, but Rowan shook his head. These filings are deliberate. Someone submitted them recently. The signature line is typed, not hand-signed, which means the state accepted it electronically. My pulse throbbed in my ears as he scrolled. A second document appeared. Inherited home renovation grant, $40,000. Applicant, Nathan Larson. Purpose: restoration of property after previous owners passing to accommodate foster placements. Below it, the line that made my entire body go numb. Previous owner no longer resides at property. I touched the screen, as if it might change under my fingers. They declared me dead, I whispered. Or moved out? Or erased? But either way, I am not supposed to be here. Rowan lowered his voice even further. Heidi, someone is telling the state you do not live at your own address, and that you cannot contest any decisions made about the property because you are, on record, gone. The word gone echoed in my mind like a hollow drum. Gone. Not relocated. Not hospitalized. Gone. Taken out of the narrative they wanted to sell. Removed from the space they wanted to profit from. Erased. I felt my breath shaking. Why would they do this? Rowan did not answer immediately. He closed his laptop as though protecting me from the documents inside. There are financial incentives, he said carefully. Tax reductions for inherited property. Grants for foster accommodations. Fewer legal obstacles when making renovations or transferring ownership. And he stopped, which frightened me more than anything else. And what? I pressed. And declaring someone deceased on paper can be a step toward requesting guardianship, power of attorney, or full control of assets. Especially if that person is elderly. The floor seemed to tilt. Guardianship, I repeated. They want to make decisions for me? Rowan nodded. If they have already filed this much, they may be preparing a claim that you are no longer capable of managing your affairs, that the house belongs to them, that your presence here is optional. Optional? As if my entire history were a rug they planned to roll up and throw away. The enormity of it hit me all at once. My wedding photos, my letters, my keepsakes, they had not just decluttered them, they had eliminated evidence of my life in the house, because legally, a dead woman could not own anything. A dead woman could not argue. A dead woman could not refuse to move out. A dead woman could not object to IVF requests or prevent them from opening their home to more foster children for higher stipends. A dead woman could not contradict the story they curated online. Nathan and Lydia had not pushed me aside. They had erased me, and the basement was my unmarked grave. Rowan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Heidi," he said, "I do not want to frighten you, but you need to understand the truth. Someone is rewriting your existence." I exhaled slowly, feeling the fear crystallize into something sharper. "Then they underestimated me," I said quietly. "I may be buried on paper, but I am still breathing, and I will not let them finish the job." Because now I understood. They had not simply taken my room or my dignity, they were preparing to take everything that bore my name, and I was done letting them write the ending. The music thumped through the ceiling, sharp and cheerful, while I lay curled on the metal folding bed they insisted was good enough for someone like me. The thin blanket barely insulated anything, and the draft from the old foundation crept up my legs until my bones felt brittle. Every laugh from the Airbnb guests stabbed like a reminder that they were living in the room where I once kept my wedding photos. Someone shook a cocktail upstairs, and the ice rattled in the glass like a taunt. Then silent night drifted through the vents, soft and gentle. But down here, it sounded like a hymn played for someone who would not be waking up again. I pressed my hands together to stop their trembling, not from the cold, but from the feeling that something inside me was collapsing under its own weight. They had taken my room, my belongings, my name on paper, and now they were celebrating above me, as if the job was already complete. I felt the loneliness settle in my chest like a stone. I used to believe loneliness was a quiet thing, but that night, it was loud, so loud, it felt like it was echoing inside my ribs. A faint creak broke the silence. The basement door opened slowly, and a small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. "Grandma?" It was Mason. My heart lifted for the first time that day. He tiptoed down, careful not to make noise. In his hands he carried a plate holding one cookie with colorful sprinkles and a small cup of milk. "I saved you the one with the most sprinkles," he said proudly, handing it to me. His innocence made the cold room feel a little less hostile. I managed a smile. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "Why are you not upstairs celebrating?" He sat beside me on the edge of the bed, swinging his feet slightly. "Dad said you will not be here next Christmas," he said matter-of-factly, as if repeating weather. My breath hitched instantly. "He said that?" Mason nodded. "He told Aunt Nicole that soon everything will be official, and then we do not have to pretend you do not live here anymore." He said the word official like it meant nothing, but to me it felt like someone had plunged a cold nail straight into my spine. I tried to steady my voice. What did he mean by official? Mason shrugged lightly. "Grown-up stuff." He said it is complicated when someone is here, but also gone. Gone. Again that word. Always that word. I touched his cheek gently. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "You are a good boy." He smiled, hugged me quickly, then hurried upstairs before anyone noticed. When the door clicked shut, I turned off the lamp and stood perfectly still until my eyes adjusted to the dim shape of the vent above the laundry shelf. The metal grill vibrated with faint voices. I pulled a chair beneath it and stood on my toes, leaning in carefully. Nathan's voice traveled down, sharp and impatient. "Once the transfer is finalized and the renewal goes through, she is out. Nursing home if she signs, adult care facility if she does not. CPS cannot know she is here. She needs to disappear from the file completely." My heart pounded so hard I feared he might hear it through the duct. Lydia answered, colder than I had ever heard her. "If anyone finds out we lied about her living somewhere else, we lose the foster checks, the grant, everything. The best thing for everyone is if she fades away quietly." Fades away. They were speaking of me as if I were a stain they needed gone before the next inspection. Nathan exhaled sharply. "She already did. On paper." I closed my eyes tightly. Everything inside me tightened into one sharp point of fear, followed by something even sharper clarity. They were not just trying to move me. They were not just lying to the state. They needed me silent, invisible, unrecorded. The vent buzzed again. Lydia's voice lowered. "After New Year, she will not complicate anything. "This house will finally be ours," Nathan answered. "She is practically gone already. One push, and it is done." I stepped off the chair slowly, my breath trembling, but my mind crystal clear. I walked back to the bed and saw the small bell they had left on the table, the one they told me to ring if I needed help. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, then set it back down with deliberate care. I would not ring it. I would not ask them for anything ever again. I whispered into the cold air, not in fear but in resolve. If they buried me in paperwork, then I will use that same paperwork to bury their entire scheme. And in that moment, the basement that had felt like a tomb became something else, entirely a place where I was sharpening the truth they believed I no longer possessed. I was not fading, I was rising, and they had no idea what was coming. I was still shaking from everything I had overheard the night before when Rowan called early the next morning. His voice was steady, but there was urgency beneath it. "Heidi, I sent everything to someone who can actually protect you," he said. "Someone with authority. Her name is Agent Caroline Brooks, State Fraud and Elder Protection." I sat down slowly on the basement bed, the metal frame groaning under me. "What did you send her?" I asked. "All of it," he replied. "The grant scans, the tax exemption, the foster rehearsal video, the photos of your basement setup, and the listing that pretends you don't exist." For a moment I could not breathe. Someone new, someone who mattered. Later, I would learn how it unfolded from Caroline herself. She was working a late shift that night, which meant urgent reports were routed directly to her instead of waiting until morning. She told me the case was immediately flagged as a priority. Elder exploitation always triggers an accelerated review. She told me she opened Rowan's email in the middle of her shift, expecting a minor fraud tip. Instead, she found my life laid out in documents, my name listed as deceased owner, the $40,000 grant request, the foster certification forms pretending the house belonged solely to Nathan and Lydia, all tied together by a single thread. My disappearance. She told me she stared at the line, "Owner," no longer resides at property, and felt something inside her tighten. Then she checked the system. And the truth hit her. There was a flag next to my name. Death, non-residency. The state believed I no longer lived in my own home. Worse, a draft document for durable power of attorney was sitting in the system, waiting for submission. Nathan described me as mentally declining, confused, unsafe to manage affairs. He was preparing to take control of my finances, my medical decisions, my life. Caroline told me her exact thought. They weren't just stealing her house. They were erasing her as a legal person. That sentence alone made my knees weak, and then, as she scrolled, she saw the foster allowance being issued monthly, the grant payment pending inspection, the tax reductions already applied. Everything aligned into a single, ugly picture. She sat back in her chair and whispered, "This is organized, this is planned, this is predatory." What happened next, she did not expect. She typed Larson Home Montana Foster Airbnb into her search bar, curious if there were photos of the home for inspection. That was when she stumbled onto a TikTok. A cheerful young couple filming a tour of the house. They panned through the rooms with excited commentary, but the important part was not the video, it was the audio in the background. Nathan's voice, lazy and smug, drifted through the hallway behind them. "Paperwork already says she doesn't live here." The guest mentioned later in a comment that he hadn't meant to record anything private. The house simply echoed in strange ways. "The state thinks we took over the place for the kid. We're basically set." On the hallway wall behind them, I noticed a framed memorial certificate bearing the signature of Pastor Riley, a name I wouldn't recognize until much later. At the time, I assumed it was just another decorative piece Lydia liked to display, not a document that would unravel part of their scheme. Caroline told me she replayed it 5 times to make sure. It was not just admission, it was bragging. "Criminals love to talk," she said. "They just never expect the internet to be listening." Still, she wanted a witness, someone from the outside who had nothing to gain. So she drove through the snow to my street and knocked on the door of Mrs. Callahan, the elderly woman who lived next door. I did not know this part until later. Caroline said the old woman opened the door holding a mug of tea and, as soon as she heard my name, invited her in without hesitation. She told Caroline everything. She had seen me carrying heavy laundry baskets down to the basement while Nathan watched with crossed arms. She had seen my bedroom lights never turn on anymore. She heard shouting Nathan's voice late at night. And once, she saw me sitting shivering on the back porch because they forgot to let me in. But the worst was the phone call she overheard through her window. Lydia's voice, sharp and annoyed. The old woman is basically gone already. Once the paperwork clears, everything will run smoother. Caroline told me that was the moment she closed her notebook and said to herself, "This isn't just fraud. This is elder abuse and calculated disappearance." When she finally came to meet me, Rowan arranged for us to speak in a small consultation room at his clinic. I sat very still, afraid to hope. She walked in wearing a dark winter coat, snow still clinging to the hem, and when she looked at me, it was not pity I saw in her eyes, it was conviction. She sat across from me and placed a folder on the table. "Mrs. Larson," she said gently, "you are not crazy. You are not confused. You are not imagining what is happening in that house." My throat tightened instantly. No one had said words like that to me in months. She continued, her voice firmer. "They buried you on paper to profit from your absence. They lied to the state. They manipulated the foster system. They applied for grants under false pretenses, and they prepared legal documents to strip you of your rights." I pressed my hands together to stop their shaking. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you still own something they want," she said. "And because you refused to fund their IVF, they convinced themselves you did not deserve to stay alive in your own life." She leaned in. "But that ends now." I felt tears rise, but they were not from fear. They were from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. She placed her hand over mine. "They buried you on paper," she said. "Now we're going to dig out the paper and bury their scheme instead." For the first time in a long time, I felt protected. Not hidden away. Not erased. Not alone. A storm was coming, but for once, it was not coming for me. The morning of December 26th began with a kind of silence that did not belong in my house. Not the usual muffled footsteps or Lydia's voice floating through the vents. This was heavier, tighter, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then came the knock. Not a polite tap, a firm, resonant thud that made the walls stop pretending. Before I climbed the stairs, I heard Lydia's brittle sweetness crack open at the front door as she chirped, "Oh, you must be early for checkout." A woman's voice cut through her lie. Calm, sharp. "We are not here for Airbnb." When I stepped into the hallway, the house looked nothing like the home I once knew. Caroline stood in the center in her long dark coat, flanked by 2 police officers, an IRS investigator, a representative from social services, someone from the foster agency, and a stern man holding a folder marked Insurance Review. Behind them, the Airbnb guests clutched their suitcases, eyes wide, realizing they had stepped into a crime scene rather than a holiday lodge. Lydia's face drained of color, but Nathan moved forward with that false confidence I had watched him weaponize since childhood. "Officers," he said, attempting a wounded son tone. "My mother has dementia. She gets confused. I handle all her affairs. If someone made a complaint, I can clear it up." Lydia added quickly, "We've sacrificed so much to care for her and for Sam. We barely sleep. We give everything we have for this family." Caroline did not even look at them. She turned to me. "Mrs. Heidi Larson, may I ask you 3 questions?" I nodded. "Your full legal name?" "Heidi Marie Larson." "Your date of birth?" "August 10th, 1953. "Your current address?" I stated it clearly, my voice steady, my spine straighter than it had felt in years. Caroline turned, slow and deliberate, toward Nathan. "Interesting," she said. "Deceased, non-resident, mentally declining individuals usually don't answer quite so well." His face twitched. Lydia swallowed hard. Caroline opened her folder with surgical precision. "Let's go through these one at a time." She held up the first document, property tax exemption. filed under inherited home adjustment, deceased owner listed as you, Mrs. Larson, with your son as beneficiary. The IRS agent added, approved under false pretenses. She placed another form on the coffee table. State renovation grant. $40,000. Purpose: post-inheritance restoration to accommodate foster placement, again referencing the owner's passing. The foster agency worker inhaled sharply, scribbling notes. Caroline pulled out the draft power of attorney next. This, she said, was prepared but not yet filed. It describes Mrs. Larson as mentally unstable, unfit to manage her own affairs, and needing immediate transfer of authority to Mr. Nathan Larson. Nathan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then Caroline tapped her phone. And here, she said, her voice turning almost casual, is a TikTok recorded by one of your guests. She pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the living room, unmistakable, careless, proud. Paperwork already says she doesn't live here. The state thinks we took over the place for the kid. We're basically set. The room froze. Even the Christmas lights seemed to flicker in shame. Caroline looked at him. Would you like to explain why you told state agencies your mother was dead? Why you told foster care she no longer lived here? And why you told the internet you were proud of it? The foster worker stepped forward, voice tight. You claimed this home was dedicated to Sam's therapeutic placement. You failed to disclose a live and elder relative. And you filed fictitious status forms. That alone can terminate your certification. The insurance investigator lifted his folder. And the increased accidental death policy you purchased for Mrs. Larson? 3 increments over 2 years? That will require a full criminal review. At that moment, the front door opened again. Pastor Riley stepped in, hat in hand, eyes full of regret. Caroline asked one question. Pastor, did you or did you not sign a document that Nathan represented as part of a memorial? He swallowed. He told me it was symbolic. A spiritual practice. He never told me he planned to use it for legal paperwork. Caroline nodded. Thank you. That's all. The officer stepped forward. She looked Nathan straight in the eyes and said, Mr. Larson, you are under investigation for foster fraud, grant fraud, elder abuse, attempted coercion of a vulnerable adult, false statements to state agencies, and insurance deception. Please turn around. Lydia backed away immediately. This wasn't my idea, she spat. He dragged me into it. But Caroline lifted a second set of cuffs. Mrs. Larson, you signed the grant. You perpetuated the false narrative. You are an accomplice. Lydia screamed as the cuffs closed around her wrists. Nathan's voice broke. Mason, Mason, tell them your grandmother ruined everything. Tell them I did this for us. Mason stood halfway down the stairs, small hands gripping the railing, tears trembling in his eyes. He looked at his father, then at me, then back at him, and in the quietest, bravest voice I have ever heard, he said, No, Dad, Grandma never lied. You did. My heart cracked open and healed in the same breath. I opened my arms, and Mason ran into them, burying his face against me. I held him close as the officers led his parents away. I whispered into his hair, This is what truth looks like, sweetheart. It doesn't need paperwork. And for the first time in a very long time, the house finally felt honest. When the last cruiser disappeared down the snowy road and the flashing lights finally faded from the windows, I stood in the middle of my living room in a silence that felt earned. For the first time in years, the quiet did not feel like punishment. It felt like truth settling into the floorboards. The house was placed under immediate freeze order. No one could sell, transfer, or adjust ownership until the court reviewed every piece of paperwork. It took only a week for the judge to confirm what should have never been questioned. I was the sole legal owner. Every form that claimed otherwise the deceased owner, the non-resident, the mentally declining elder narrative, was officially voided and moved into an active criminal file. The $40,000 renovation grant was revoked and converted into a debt Nathan and Lydia were now responsible for repaying with penalties. The foster agency banned them permanently, noting ethical violation, fraud, and unsafe environment. Social services added their names to a statewide watch list. The insurance investigator filed his own report, citing premeditated intent to misuse accidental death coverage. I watched all of this unfold without satisfaction at first, only exhaustion, because these consequences, severe as they were, could not give me back the years of being minimized, dismissed, or rewritten by the two people who should have protected me. But they did give me clarity. A house that had once been built on love had turned into a mausoleum for a version of me they wanted gone. I had no desire to stay inside the place where my son buried me on paper, so when the court handed the property back to me, I made my choice without hesitation. I sold the house. Not in anger, though I had enough anger to fill the basement they kept me in, but because a home is meant to hold a life, and mine had been forced into silence there for far too long. With that money and a little more I had saved from a lifetime of careful choices, I bought a small cabin near the Montana tree line, where the river whispers against the stones and the pines sway like they remember your name. It was modest, a single-story place with a wood-burning stove and windows large enough to let the moon spill across my floors. On my first morning there, I hung a wind chime under the porch eave. The sound was soft, gentle, a reminder that even metal can sing again when the wind changes. I joined a local women's group, widows, retired teachers, grandmothers, and one former long-haul trucker who baked cinnamon bread so good it should have been illegal. We practiced slow yoga, the kind that feels more like breathing than stretching. We baked together. We told stories that had been locked inside our throats for decades. For once, I was not the ghost in the room. I was simply a woman among women. On Christmas Eve, I lit my porch with warm string lights, brewed real cocoa with cream and cinnamon, wrapped myself in a quilt I had sewn before Nathan was born, and rocked gently while watching the snow fall. There were no raised voices, no locks, no fear, just peace in a body that had survived colder winters than this. In January, I worked with my attorney to establish a small fund for older adults who, like me, had been pressured or manipulated into signing documents they did not understand. I added a second branch dedicated to helping foster children avoid being used as financial props. And I funded a partnership with a local legal clinic to provide free consultations to any elder who feared they were being erased the way I nearly was. Rowan visited the cabin often. He brought bread from the city bakery and updates on Sam, whom he continued to mentor quietly. Caroline visited too, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in a thick winter sweater with her hair pulled back and a kindness that felt almost familial. They became what my heart softly called chosen family, the kind that shows up without needing anything in return. One snowy afternoon, a relative brought Mason to visit me. He carried a tin of cookies, his hands trembling with the cold. When he hugged me, he whispered, "Dad said you were gone, but you weren't." I held his face in my hands. "No, sweetheart. I was here the whole time. They just tried to erase me." He nodded, like he finally understood something no child should have to learn. A week later, I received a hand-drawn card from Sam. A stick figure drawing of me, standing between two pine trees, a smile on my face. The words under it read, "Thank you for seeing me." I kept it on my kitchen counter, next to the jar of tea leaves I brew every morning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the snow turned blue in the fading light, I stood on my porch and let the cold air fill my lungs. I thought of the house I sold, the lies written on paper, the basement where they tried to bury me alive without a grave, and then I whispered, steady and certain, "They tried to erase me from the house I built so they could cash in on my absence." But when the truth finally walked through that door, it wasn't my life that disappeared. It was their future. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the truth warm me from the inside out. I did not come back from the dead. I simply outlived their lies. My dears, thank you for staying with me through every cold night in that basement and every step I took back into the light. Stories like mine are heavier than they look, but they matter because somewhere out there, another grandmother is being pushed aside, silenced, or erased on paper before she is ever gone in life, and she needs to know she is not alone. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you angry, or proud, or hopeful, if you believe truth deserves to be heard, not buried, then I would love for you to stay with our little family here. Please hit subscribe and join us at Grandma True Stories, where we protect the unheard, honor the overlooked, and give every grandmother the voice she deserves. Thank you, my loves. Until the next story, take gentle care of your heart.